So I'm not really much of a gardener. It's not a skill I've ever really had a chance to develop. I can definitely appreciate the way that the farmers in Jesus's audience would have needed good seed and good soil. Their lives would have depended on it, but I can't really relate to it. But I did plant some corn once. When I was maybe 9 years old, my younger cousin and I decided we're going to be farmers and we're going to plant corn and we're going to harvest it and we're going to eat it. I may or may not have been mildly obsessed with the Little House on the Prairie books at the time. So the problems with our plan were many. We did not have good soil. This was in Florida, about a 10-minute drive from the beach, so our soil was barely half a step away from being pure sand. We didn't have good seeds. Our seeds were the unpopped kernels from a bag of microwave popcorn. Corn is corn, right? Even if it's been processed and microwaved and nibbled on by a kid. So we planted 2 seeds. And what do you know? Our super secret corn farm sprouted 2 stalks. They were nice, healthy green, and they were knee-high by the 4th of July. But we never got to find out if our corn would bring forth grain, 100-fold or 60 or 30 or even 1. Jesus didn't include this in the parable, but the seed which is sown in your grandma's flower bed gets uprooted to make room for snapdragons. Such is the life of a super secret corn farmer. So my brief adventure as a corn farmer aside, I don't have too much experience with seeds and soil to draw on here. But that's okay because Jesus totally explained the parable. The birds are demons and the rocky soil is the fair weather Christian and the thorns are distractions and the good soil is the person who hears and understands the word. Obviously. Except, from a farming standpoint, you'd think that Jesus as the sower would be focusing on the good soil that's going to bring a good yield. But he doesn't. There's nothing to indicate that the sower is deliberately favoring the good soil. The same verb is used for all of the seeds. Some fell here, some fell there. None of it sounds accidental or like an experiment. So what if Jesus wanted the disciples to think about what kind of soil they might be? Of course, at this point in the story, they're going to say that they're the good soil and they believe it. They don't yet know that they've heard the word of the kingdom and don't understand much of it. They don't yet believe that Jesus will be arrested and crucified, and they certainly don't know that when they face that test, they'll all run away to hide like the seeds who grew in the shallow, rocky soil. But at this point in the story, Jesus knows that all of this is going to happen. Undoubtedly, Jesus could have called braver, wiser disciples to follow him. You toss out a few good miracles, you can attract a lot of people. But he didn't. He focused his efforts on this group of very unlikely people. He nurtured them and taught them. He waited patiently while they blundered along in their misunderstandings, and he stood alone when they ran to hide. Maybe it's no accident that the parable specifically says rocky ground instead of shallow ground. Maybe that's a little bit of foreshadowing about a little dig at Peter, the rock on whom Jesus will build his church, falling away and denying Jesus 3 times the night before the crucifixion. But our shallowly planted rocky Peter came back. He led the church through its birth and held strong against the Roman persecution. Jesus poured out the word of the kingdom like infinite waterfalls of grace, and it took root in soil no one would have ever expected. Tax collectors, prostitutes, sinners, disciples. It's impossible to waste the word of the kingdom, and it's so much more than a spoken word. It's the way of the kingdom and the actions that build the kingdom. And what might happen when it's poured out so recklessly? In the 1970s, Antonia Brenner felt that she was being called to devote herself as a nun and to work among the prisoners at the maximum security La Mesa prison in Tijuana. But she had been divorced twice, and she had reached the absolutely decrepit old age of 38, so she was turned down by various religious orders. Antonia, well, she wasn't good soil, you see. Too old, too divorced, no sense wasting any effort on her. Why waste time with prisoners? They weren't good soil either. Well, Antonia had a bit more to say about that. She started working with the prisoners anyway. She gained their trust and their love to the point that she was able to defuse a prison riot just by pleading with the prisoners over the loudspeaker. They called her La Mama. Eventually, Antonia was permitted to found a new order of nuns, the Servants of the 11th Hour. She became Mother Antonia, and she allowed older divorced women into her order. She took care of those prisoners for the rest of her life and died in 2013 after a life of service. So I'd say that brought forth some grain. But it doesn't end there. Tony Granillo spent 10 years in La Mesa prison. He struggled with drug addiction, but Mother Antonia befriended him and inspired him. Once he was released, Tony went through rehab and opened a free clinic for patients with AIDS. Tony Granillo didn't look like good soil, but how much grain has he brought forth into the lives of his patients? And for that matter, what about the AIDS patients themselves? They've been written off as hopeless for so long by so many people. But Tony devotes his life to living out the word for them just the same. What grain might they bring into the world? Now, this is a strange piece of double thinking we have to go through as Christians. We have to prepare ourselves, unlikely disciples as we may be, to be the good soil that can hear and accept the word. But we can't accept anyone else to prepare themselves, and we're supposed to live the word for them freely, without making any kind of judgment as to what sort of soil they might be. It's not so hard in the abstract, but then actual people come along and mess up the perfection of the theory. Love everyone sounds great until you meet everyone. Could my abusive alcoholic grandpa have been good soil? What about a corporate polluter? What kind of soil are they? What about the girl who likes to humiliate me in 8th grade, or a person who refuses to recycle, or even someone who's committed murder? Could they possibly be good soil? Well, Jesus would probably tell me they might be. Jesus would tell me, just plant the seeds. I'll work on getting them to grow. Where do the acts of kindness that build the kingdom go when they leave our hands? Some may bear grain 100-fold, like nuns who help prisoners who help AIDS patients. Some might get uprooted to plant snapdragons. The point is just to plant them and to trust that the Spirit will get them where they need to be. Amen.